Hi guys, it's Rob from Royal Balls. Just got the news today that we're in lockdown for an additional 2 weeks. So today I want to talk about a possible allelic complex, Cinnamon Enchi. Some of you may have heard of this being allelic before, some of you may not. It all started last year when I had a clutch of Cinnamon Enchi banana hatchlings and had a really tough time identifying them. And Robert Whittier from Coach's Royal Reptiles, we had a conversation about Cinnamon Enchi, and he had a Cinnamon Enchi that had bred for a couple of seasons and hadn't ever given him a normal. He'd had cinnamons, he'd had Enchis, no Cinnamon Enchis and no normals, which strongly suggested to him that the complex was allelic. And then over the last few weeks I've heard it mentioned twice by Billy at Mutation Creation. Billy and Austin have mentioned it, that Cinnamon and Enchi is an allelic complex. So not to be too controversial, let me add my piece of the jigsaw to that. We're going to look at that clutch of Cinnamon Enchi hatchlings that I got and have a look at trying to identify them and what the allelic complex possibly does and what the implications of that might be for any of you that are involved in this project trying to breed Cinnamon Enchi animals. So let's take a look. Let's just take a quick look at the pairing that produced this. This is my Cinnamon Mojave female, or Savannah. She's a really big girl. So this is the female Cinnamon, and you'll notice how much darker she is than her offspring here, which is the Cinnamon Enchi girl. Much different colour. The Enchi is acting as a really strong brightening gene. And this is Dad for this pairing. Dad is a banana Pastel Enchi warmer. You can see he's quite clean, not so many spots, dwarfed by the big girl. So this is the original pairing that we're going to take a look at some of the offspring to see how Cinnamon and Enchi react together. So this is banana Pastel Enchi warmer to Cinnamon Mojave. So let's take a look at this girl first. This is a female, so she is staying with me. It's a holdback. This is what I believe to be a Cinnamon Enchi, possibly with Mojave, but definitely Cinnamon Enchi. You can see that it lacks the typical Enchi head stamp. Very hard to see the butterfly. It is there, just very faintly, and she does have the eye stripes at the side, which is a giveaway for Enchi. She's very bright, much brighter than you would expect a cinnamon to be, but the very strong banding that Enchi normally produces has disappeared completely. We're left with, can you see these teardrops here that join up onto this unusually coloured dorsal? When she first hatched out, this was really bright yellow dorsal, and you can see that some of the alien heads here actually run up and over onto the other side. This is another example here. You can see those alien heads that run over the dorsal and onto the other side. So there is some banding produced by the Enchi, but this is not what you would expect from Cinnamon Enchi. You would expect to get a much darker snake with much stronger banding, and instead we get quite a bright snake with a very distinctive coloured dorsal and this strange reduced banding produced by the Enchi. So this is what I think Cinnamon and Enchi together look like. You can see the very bright yellow stripe down here, which is totally different to what I would have expected from Cinnamon Enchi. So you can see the neck here, quite a bright dorsal, very distinct from the actual alien heads, and the rest of the snake, but the cinnamon is also much lighter coloured, almost as if there's lesser in there, but there isn't lesser in this combination. So this is Cinnamon Enchi, possible Mojave. Okay, this is where things start to get pretty wacky. This is a banana Cinnamon Enchi, and again you can immediately see that this does not look like either an Enchi or a cinnamon. The oranges are still present, but they're very, very blushed. You can see the very, very bright dorsal, again reminiscent of the Cinnamon Enchi girl that we just looked at. A very, very bright coloured dorsal, and the Enchi banding is quite reduced. You see that it's just limited to a dorsal pattern with some limited banding down the sides. If we have a look at the head stamp, you can see clearly the Enchi head stamp and the widening eye stripes, so typical of Enchi. And obviously this does have cinnamon in it because of the very bright orange. But let's just contrast this, the banana Cinnamon Enchi, to a straight banana Enchi. Okay, so side by side, this yellow snake here is the one that does not have cinnamon in it, but you can see how the pattern in the Cinnamon Enchi is very, very different to the pattern on the Enchi by itself. Enchi by itself still retains very, very strong banding down the sides, very strong banding all the way down. And the dorsal stripe is quite broken. You can see along the back here the dorsal stripe is broken in places, whereas on this guy here tends to be a lot more continuous. So adding cinnamon to this guy you would expect would just make it more orange, and it doesn't. It makes it orange, but also changes the pattern and puts this really, really bright dorsal stripe onto the animal. So that's a comparison of just banana Enchi with banana Cinnamon Enchi, and it's not doing what you would expect it to do. It's not producing just a bright orange version of the banana Enchi. It's actually making other changes. It's very, very bright dorsal, and you'll see that this banana Cinnamon Enchi also has that sort of faded hypo look to it as well. This snake here is very clean, crisp and bright, and this one has an almost hypo look to it. So there's a contrast between banana Enchi and banana Enchi with cinnamon. So cinnamon and Enchi are definitely reacting together to give you something that you wouldn't expect. I just want to briefly take a moment to show you what Pastel does when you mix it with cinnamon and banana. And again, this may have Mojave in it. You can see from the head stamp and the white lips that this is clearly Pastel. But when you mix Pastel with cinnamon, it produces pewter, and this of course is a banana pewter. There is cinnamon, there is Pastel, and there is banana, but there is no Enchi in this snake, so it produces the classic pewter, a silvery snake with banana added, which makes it yellow. So we know that when you mix Pastel and cinnamon, it produces a very washed out snake. This is banana pewter. Now let's have a look at this guy. Clearly there is cinnamon in this guy. Look at the head stamp and the white lips. Clearly there is Pastel. So why is this snake not a pewter? We've mixed Pastel and we've mixed clearly cinnamon, but we're not getting pewter. Why is that? Well, because this is also Enchi. So the Cinnamon Enchi combination again gives you this amazingly bright dorsal stripe down the animal, and because cinnamon and Enchi are allelic, Pastel does not produce a pewter. It is now reacting very differently with the allelic combination than it does with just the straight cinnamon. It does not produce a pewter when Enchi is in the mix. And I don't know whether the camera is picking this up, but you see the oranges and the blushing down the side of this guy here. The head stamp, again you can see Pastel. Now this isn't just a straight banana cinnamon Enchi. This also has warmer in it. So let me just pull out the original banana. So we'll get rid of the banana pewter, which is Pastel cinnamon. This is what you would expect Pastel and cinnamon to do. So this is a banana cinnamon Enchi. This is banana cinnamon Enchi with Pastel and warmer added. And you can see now the striking similarity of the very, very bright dorsal. Very bright dorsal on both of these animals. But the Pastel in this guy here is really bringing out that cinnamon orange colour, which you wouldn't expect with cinnamon. Cinnamon Pastel should give pewter, and it isn't. And that's because there's Enchi in the mix, and Pastel is reacting with the allelic combination rather than with just the cinnamon. So both of these animals have Enchi and cinnamon. This guy here has Pastel, and you can see what a difference Pastel makes to the overall look of the animal. This is just Enchi. This is Enchi warmer, so the pattern is even more strongly reduced, but you can see still the very, very strong bright dorsal line, and you can also see that we're not getting pewter with Pastel added. Let's take a look at another one. This is not a fluke. Here is another example of Pastel, obviously from the head stamp and the white lips. So this is Cinnamon Enchi with Pastel, and you can see the very, very bright dorsal again, which seems to be typical of this Cinnamon Enchi relationship. It gives a very, very bright, strong dorsal. And I think this animal here, because of the dots, also has Mojave, so I don't know whether this has warmer. It's certainly banana, cinnamon, Enchi, Pastel, probably also Mojave, which is why it's slightly different to the first animal that we looked at. But again, we're not getting pewter. You can see this clearly is Enchi and clearly is cinnamon, but it's not pewter, suggesting that cinnamon and Enchi together is an allelic combination, and therefore Pastel is acting differently with the allelic combination than it does with just cinnamon and Pastel. So here is our combo with Cinnamon Enchi, Pastel, banana and possibly Mojave, and you see the really, really bright dorsal striping on here, and we're not getting pewter. Let me show you the same snake without cinnamon. So here we have exactly the same snake. You can see exactly the same pattern. This snake here is a Pastel, Enchi, banana, Mojave without the cinnamon. Remarkable similarity in pattern, in head stamp. But no dorsal blushing, no dorsal stripe on this guy. Without that cinnamon Enchi interaction, you do not get the really, really bright stripe down the dorsal. Again, suggesting that cinnamon and Enchi are reacting in a different way to what you would expect. So 2 identical snakes, banana, pastel, Enchi, Mojave, without cinnamon, with cinnamon. So Cinnamon Enchi is what's producing this really bright dorsal stripe, and is what's preventing the pastel from making this a pewter. Awesome. So what are the genetic implications of Cinnamon Enchi being allelic? Aside from when you combine cinnamon and Enchi together, you get an outcome which is different to the one that you were expecting, and we've also seen how pastel reacts differently with the allelic combination than it does with cinnamon on its own. Those would be normal things for an allelic relationship. What it also means is that if you have a Cinnamon Enchi, you cannot get a normal because the cinnamon gene and the Enchi gene act like a super. When you split the genetic material in half, half the babies will get cinnamon, half the babies will get Enchi, but you will not get both. What that also means is you cannot create a super cinnamon Enchi or a super Enchi cinnamon. Aside from the fact that the loci on the genetic material does not permit the third copy of the gene, in this case this would be super cinnamon Enchi, there's no room. This will be super Enchi cinnamon, there's no room. There's also no genetic combination that you could breed together that would allow the making of a super cinnamon Enchi or a super Enchi cinnamon. The normal route, if they are non-allelic, would be to take a cinnamon Enchi and breed it to a cinnamon Enchi. So let's do that, but we're going to assume that they are actually and acts like a super. So this is the male, this is the female, and we split the genetic material in half. So for the male you can breed the half with cinnamon to the half of the female with Enchi, so you get cinnamon Enchi, or you can breed it to this half, which is cinnamon and cinnamon, which is a super cinnamon, or you take the other half of the male's genetic material and breed it to this half of the female, which gives a super Enchi, or this half of the female, which gives another cinnamon Enchi. So you see that the outcome is exactly the same as a previous video I showed, the highways and freeways. You get 1 super Enchi, 1 super cinnamon, and 2 cinnamon Enchis for each of the 4 offspring. You cannot get a super cinnamon Enchi or a super Enchi cinnamon. That has major implications for anybody working this project. Okay guys, thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget to stay safe, stay at home. The more we all pull together and do this, the quicker we'll be out of this lockdown period. So let's make sure we make that happen. Don't forget to share, like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.